I never imagined my 45th wedding anniversary would end with my husband down on one knee, proposing to another woman. But there he was, Richard, my 70-year-old husband of nearly half a century, pulling out a velvet box in front of all our friends and family, his eyes fixed not on me, but on Eleanor Caldwell, his college sweetheart who'd mysteriously reappeared in our lives 6 months earlier. The room fell silent, champagne glasses frozen midair, as he spoke those words I'd heard once before, a lifetime ago. "I've never stopped loving you. Will you marry me?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In that moment, I should have felt my heart shatter. Instead, I felt something unexpected, relief. Because I had 3 truths tucked away that would change everything. Truths I'd been holding on to for months, waiting for the right moment. As it turns out, watching your husband propose to another woman at your own anniversary party is exactly the right moment. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from sharing a bed with someone for 45 years while feeling completely unseen. I'd become an ornament in Richard's life, the silent, supportive wife who managed our colonial-style home in Oak Ridge, Connecticut, who entertained his colleagues impeccably, who never complained. At 67, I'd spent so long being Richard's wife that most days I struggled to remember who Elizabeth Harrington had been before. I still remember the day we met. I was 22, fresh out of college with a teaching degree and dreams of opening my own preschool someday. Richard was 25, ambitious and charming, already climbing the corporate ladder at Connecticut National Bank. He swept me off my feet with his confidence, his clear vision of our future. I was dazzled by how certain he seemed about everything, including me. "You won't need to worry about opening that preschool, Beth," he'd said, taking my hand across the table during one of our early dates. "When we're married, you'll have the most beautiful home to manage, and eventually, children of our own to teach." It sounded romantic then, being chosen, being taken care of. I didn't realize I was agreeing to disappear. The garden room was my favorite place in our house, a sun-drenched space I'd created from the unused porch, filled with potted ferns and flowering plants I tended daily. It was there I sat that Tuesday morning in October, holding the cardiologist's report. Mild heart failure, will require lifestyle modifications, stress reduction, regular monitoring. The words blurred as I read them again, not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough. A warning shot across the bow. I placed the folder on the coffee table, right next to the remote control Richard used every evening, beside the crossword puzzle he completed each morning. I didn't hide it. I didn't announce it either. I simply waited to see if anyone would notice that something was wrong. 3 days passed. The folder sat untouched, while life continued as usual. Richard asked where his blue tie was, complained about the neighbor's dog, and reminded me about hosting the Thompsons for dinner on Friday. Our son Brian called twice to ask if I could watch Tyler and Amy this weekend because Melissa had a conference. Our daughter Jennifer dropped by with a bag of outgrown clothes, asking if I could take them in for Sophie. No one, not once, asked why I'd been quieter than usual, or noticed the appointment cards from Oak Ridge Memorial that had been sitting on the counter. On the 4th day, I had a follow-up appointment with the cardiologist. I'd marked it on the family calendar hanging in the kitchen, the one Richard claimed to check every morning. I'd even mentioned it casually at breakfast. "I'll be out this afternoon for a few hours." He'd nodded absently, eyes on his tablet, scanning market reports. By the time I returned home at 5:30, my phone had 17 missed calls. The first voicemail was from Jennifer, her voice sharp with irritation. "Mom, where are you? Sophie's piano recital started 15 minutes ago, and she's freaking out backstage because her grandmother promised to be in the front row. Call me back immediately." The second was from Brian. "Mom, Jennifer just called me. What's going on? You never miss the kids' events. Dad says you didn't tell anyone you had plans today. Are you okay? The third was Richard, his tone clipped and businesslike. Elizabeth, I've had 3 calls about Sophie's recital. Whatever errand you're running needs to wait. This is important. I stood in our immaculate foyer, prescription bag in one hand, phone in the other, and felt something inside me crack. I hadn't forgotten Sophie's recital. It had never been mentioned to me, not once. Yet somehow, this was my failure. I called Jennifer back first. Mom, finally! Where have you been? Her voice echoed through what sounded like a hallway. She must have stepped out of the recital. I had a doctor's appointment, I said quietly. A doctor's appointment? Today of all days? Sophie has been planning this for weeks. You know how important her music is to her. Jennifer, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. No one told me about Sophie's recital. Not you, not Sophie, not anyone. There was a pause, then a defensive shift. I definitely told you last Sunday at dinner. I specifically remember saying it was this Thursday at 5. I closed my eyes. Jennifer, I wasn't at dinner last Sunday. I was visiting Aunt Martha at the nursing home. Remember? Another pause, longer this time. Well, I must have told Dad to tell you then. And he didn't, I said simply. Just like no one has asked about the cardiology report that's been sitting on the coffee table since Tuesday. What cardiology report? Mom? What are you talking about? I found myself suddenly exhausted, the weight of years pressing down. Give Sophie my love. Tell her I'm sorry I missed her playing. I'm sure she was wonderful. Mom? I ended the call. My phone immediately began ringing again, but I silenced it and walked slowly to the kitchen. I placed my new medications in the cabinet, next to the vitamins no one but me remembered to take. I filled a glass with water and drank it slowly, looking out at the garden I'd created from nothing, the roses still blooming despite the autumn chill. The front door opened with Richard's distinctive heavy step. Elizabeth, where have you been? His voice held the familiar note of exasperation he reserved for when I'd inconvenienced him in some way. I turned to face my husband of 45. Years. His silver hair was still thick, his posture straight. The very picture of a successful, well-preserved man in his 70s. He'd aged well. Everyone said so. I wondered suddenly if I had too, and realized I rarely looked in mirrors. Anymore. I had a cardiology appointment, I said. I've been diagnosed with heart failure. His expression shifted from irritation to shock. Heart failure? That's impossible. You're perfectly healthy. Apparently not. Why didn't you tell me? I gestured toward the living room. The report has been on the coffee table since Tuesday. You can't expect me to notice something like that just sitting there, he said, defensive now. If it was important, you should have told me directly. The familiar pressure started building in my chest, not my heart condition, but decades of swallowed words. You're right, I said finally. I should have known better than to expect you to notice anything about me unless I announce it. His eyebrows rose. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm tired, Richard. I'm tired of being invisible until something goes wrong. I'm tired of everyone assuming I'll handle everything without ever being asked if I can, or if I want to. Is this about Sophie's recital? Jennifer said you forgot. It happens, Elizabeth. No need to be dramatic about it. No one told me about the recital. My voice was quiet but firm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Just like no one asked about my doctor's appointment that was clearly marked on the calendar. Just like no one has noticed that I've been making excuses not to eat for 3 days because I've been too anxious about these test results. Richard loosened his tie, a gesture I'd seen thousands of times before. It meant he was uncomfortable and wanted the conversation to end. Look, I'm sorry if you feel overlooked, but you're making a mountain out of a molehill. We all have a lot going on. He glanced at his watch. The Thompsons will be here in less than 2 hours. Is dinner under control? And there it was, the expectation that regardless of what was happening in my life, my primary concern should be making sure his life proceeded smoothly. I looked at this man I'd built a life with and felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing a scene in someone else's home. No, I said, the word falling from my lips before I fully formed the thought. Dinner is not under control because I won't be cooking tonight. Richard stared at me. What? Call the Thompsons and cancel, or order takeout, or cook something yourself. I'm going out. Going out? Where? With whom? I picked up my purse from the counter. I don't know yet, but I need some air and some time to think. Elizabeth, you're being ridiculous. If you're upset about something, we can discuss it later. Right now, we have guests coming. No, Richard, you have guests coming. I have a heart condition I need to process, alone. I walked past him toward the door, heart hammering so hard I wondered if I was making my condition worse. As I reached for the doorknob, Richard's voice stopped me. If you walk out that door right now, you're being incredibly selfish. I turned back to look at him, this man who'd slept beside me for decades but never really seen me. That's the problem, Richard. I've spent 45 years being the opposite of selfish, and where has it gotten me? I stepped outside into the crisp October air and closed the door behind me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I had nowhere specific I needed to be. Nothing pressing I needed to do. The sensation was dizzying, terrifying, and strangely exhilarating. I walked to the end of our tree-lined street, past manicured lawns and elegant homes so similar to ours. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my purse, but I didn't answer. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I hailed a taxi. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. I hesitated only a second. "The Lighthouse, please." The Lighthouse was the most expensive restaurant in Oak Ridge, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Richard and I had celebrated our anniversaries, there for years, always with the same routine. He would order for both of us, spend half the evening on business calls, and we'd be home by 9. It was elegant, predictable, and utterly devoid of joy. Tonight, I walked in alone. The maitre d' recognized me immediately, his professionalism barely masking his surprise. "Mrs. Harrington, we weren't expecting you until next month for your anniversary. Is Mr. Harrington joining you?" "No, just me tonight, Pierre. A table for one, please." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Of course. Would you prefer a table by the window?" "Yes, that would be lovely." Seated at a small table overlooking the darkening ocean, I felt conspicuous and out of place. Women my age didn't dine alone at the Lighthouse, but as I ordered a glass of wine, selecting it myself rather than deferring to Richard's expertise, a strange calm settled over me. The wine was crisp and bright on my tongue. I ordered the seafood special because I wanted it, not because it was the most modestly priced item, as had been my habit. As I waited for my meal, I noticed a woman at a neighboring table watching me. She was perhaps 15 years younger than me, dining with a man who appeared to be her husband. When our eyes met, she smiled. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but I admire you dining alone," she said. "I've never had the courage." Her husband looked embarrassed. "Tina, don't bother the lady." "It's fine," I assured him, then turned to her. "Thank you. It's my first time, actually." "Well, you look completely at ease," Tina said warmly, "like you've been doing it for years." Something about her genuine smile cracked open another sealed chamber in my heart. "I'm celebrating," I heard myself say. "I just walked out on dinner with my husband for the first time in 45 years of marriage." Instead of the awkward, Silence, I expected. Tina laughed. A full, rich sound. Then you definitely need another glass of wine. May we join you? That evening in the lighthouse marked the first real conversation I'd had that wasn't about someone else's needs in longer than I could remember. Tina and Robert Rodriguez were new to Oak Ridge. She was a ceramics artist with a studio downtown. He taught literature at the community college. They asked me questions about myself, not about Richard's career or our children's accomplishments, but about me. What did I enjoy? What had I wanted to be when I was younger? What would I do if I could do anything? I wanted to teach preschool, I admitted, slightly dizzy from the wine and the novelty of being heard. I had all these ideas about creative learning environments for young children. But then I got married, and Richard didn't think it was necessary. It's not too late, you know, Tina said, eyes bright with certainty. I didn't start working with clay until I was 40. Best decision I ever made. I smiled politely, but inside a tiny ember began to glow. What if it wasn't too late? When I finally checked my phone, I had 23 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Richard had called the police. Jennifer and Brian had been driving around town looking for me. The Thompsons had been sent home with profuse apologies about my episode. I texted Richard, "I'm fine. Needed time alone. Don't wait up." Then I turned off my phone, asked the Rodriguez couple for a recommendation, and checked into the Harbor View Inn for the night. Another first. Alone in the clean, anonymous room, I kicked off my sensible shoes and lay fully clothed on top of the bedspread, staring at the ceiling. "My name is Elizabeth Harrington," I whispered to the empty room. "I am 67 years old, and I have heart failure. I may have less time left than I thought, and I have no idea who I am anymore." That night, I dreamt of clay, my hands shaping something formless into something beautiful. When I woke, streaks of dawn were painting the harbor waters gold and pink. I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd shed a skin I'd outgrown decades ago. I turned on my phone to find even more messages, their tone evolving from anger to panic. I sent a simple text to our family group chat. "I'm safe. Coming home now? To talk. Please be there." When the taxi dropped me at our house, 3 cars were parked in the driveway. Richard's Mercedes, Jennifer's SUV, and Brian's sedan. They were waiting for me, probably rehearsing the intervention they thought I needed. I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked into my home of 43 years as if it belonged to strangers. In many ways, it did. They were gathered in the living room, Richard in his armchair, Jennifer and Brian on the sofa, their spouses hovering uncertainly nearby. All heads turned when I entered, expressions ranging from relief to confusion to irritation. "Mom!" Jennifer rushed toward me. "We've been worried sick. How could you just disappear like that?" "Where were you?" Brian demanded. "Dad called the police." Richard remained seated, his face a mask of controlled anger, and, beneath it, something I rarely saw: uncertainty. I set my purse down carefully on the side table. The cardiology report was still there, exactly where I'd left it, still unread by anyone but me. "I needed some time to think," I said calmly. "I spent the night at Harbor View Inn." "Alone?" Richard's voice held surprise and something else, suspicion. "Yes, Richard. Alone." I looked around at their concerned faces and felt suddenly very tired. "I have something important to tell all of you, and I need you to listen." I picked up the folder and held it out. 3 days ago, I was diagnosed with heart failure. It's not immediately life-threatening, but it's serious. I left the report right here, hoping someone would notice, would ask if I was okay. No one did. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. "Mom, why didn't you say something?" "Because I shouldn't have to announce that I'm unwell to receive basic concern from my family," I said quietly. "Because I'm tired of being visible only when I'm serving a purpose for someone else." "That's not fair," Brian protested. "Isn't It? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, who called me only when he needed childcare. When was the last time any of you called just to ask how I was doing? Not to ask for a favor, not to remind me of an obligation, but simply because you cared about my well-being? The silence that followed was answer enough. I've made a decision, I continued, my voice steadier than I expected. From now on, I will no longer be the default solution to everyone's problems. I will no longer cook meals without being asked or thanked. I will no longer rearrange my schedule at a moment's notice to accommodate everyone else's emergencies. And I will no longer pretend that this kind of one-sided relationship is normal or healthy. Richard stood up abruptly. Elizabeth, you're overwrought. This health scare has obviously upset you. Let's discuss this when you're thinking more clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in decades, I replied. And dismissing my feelings as overwrought is exactly the problem, Richard. Melissa, Brian's wife, had been quiet until now. I think Beth is right, she said suddenly, earning a sharp look from my son. We do take her for granted. We all do. Thank you, Melissa, I said, genuinely surprised by her support. But this isn't about blame. It's about change. I need to make changes for my health, and that includes how I relate to all of you. So what? You're just going to stop being our mother? Jennifer's voice cracked with hurt and confusion. No, Jennifer. I'm going to start being myself, whoever that is, in addition to being your mother. There's a difference. I turned to Richard, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'm going to stay with my sister Martha for a few days. I need space to think about what I want and what's best for my health. And after that? Richard asked quietly. I met his gaze steadily. I don't know yet. That depends on many things, including whether any of you actually hear what I'm saying today. As I packed a small bag upstairs, I could hear them talking about me in the living room. Concerned, confused, a little angry. They were discussing me as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person with legitimate needs. It only confirmed that I was making the right decision. When I came back downstairs, Richard was waiting alone at the bottom of the stairs. The others had apparently been sent home. This is about Eleanor, isn't it? He asked abruptly. I stared at him, genuinely confused. Eleanor? What are you talking about? Eleanor Caldwell, my old girlfriend from college. Jennifer mentioned she ran into her at the alumni event last month, and now suddenly you're having some kind of midlife crisis. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Richard, I didn't even know Eleanor was back in touch. And I'm well past midlife, as are you. He looked skeptical. Then why now? Why is this suddenly an issue after 45 years? I studied my husband's face, the face I'd woken up to for most of my life, and felt a profound sadness. It's not sudden for me, Richard. I've been disappearing for decades. You just never noticed. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned back one last time. My heart condition is real, by the way. You might want to actually read the report. As I stepped outside into the autumn sunshine, my chest felt tight, with anxiety, but also with something else, possibility. I had no idea what came next, but for the first time in decades, I would be the one deciding. In that moment, I couldn't possibly have imagined that within 6 months, Eleanor Caldwell would indeed become a central figure in our lives, or that by our 45th anniversary, Richard would be on one knee before her, while I held 3 truths that would change everything. Martha lived in a small cottage by the lake, 15 minutes outside of Oak Ridge. My older sister had always been the rebellious one, divorcing her husband of 18 years to find herself at 45. Our mother had been scandalized. Our father disappointed. I had been secretly jealous. You can stay as long as you need, Martha said, showing me to her guest room. It was simple but cozy, with windows that overlooked the water. Though I should warn you, I don't have a cleaning service or gourmet meals. We share the work here. I set my bag on the bed. I think I can manage to wash a few dishes, Martha. She studied me carefully, the afternoon sun highlighting the eye, silver in her auburn hair. At 72, Martha had the energetic presence of someone 20 years younger. This is serious, isn't it? Not just a spat with Richard? I've been diagnosed with heart failure, I said quietly. Martha's face softened with concern. Oh, Beth, why didn't you call me immediately? I left the report on the coffee table. For 3 days. No one noticed. Understanding dawned in her eyes. And that was the last straw. Something like that. That night, Martha and I sat on her porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, sipping herbal tea. The lake was a dark mirror reflecting a canopy of stars. In the quiet darkness, words came easier. I don't know who I am without him, Martha, I admitted. Without all of them, really. I've been Richard's wife, Brian and Jennifer's mother, Tyler, Amy, Sophie, and Lucas's grandmother for so long. I'm not sure there's anything left that's just me. Martha was quiet for a moment, gently pushing the swing with her foot. I felt that way too, after the divorce. Like I was this empty outline of a person. It's terrifying. How did you find yourself again? She smiled into the darkness. One piece at a time. I tried things, made mistakes, met new people who only knew the current version of me, not who I'd been before. She patted my hand. You'll find your way, Beth, and whatever you discover, I'll be here. For 3 days, I existed in a strange limbo. I took my medication, walked along the lakeshore, helped Martha in her small vegetable garden, and tried to ignore the constant barrage of messages from Richard and the children. They ranged from concerned to irritated to pleading, but none of them seemed to truly understand why I'd left. On the 4th morning, I woke early and found Martha at the kitchen table, newspaper spread out before her, coffee steaming in her favorite pottery mug. Sleep well? She asked, not looking up. Better than I have in years, I admitted, pouring myself a cup of coffee. I gestured to her mug. That's beautiful. Where did you get it? Made it myself at the community center. They have a ceramic studio there. She glanced up at me. Why? Interested? I traced the rim of my own plain white mug. Maybe. I used to love working with my hands. Before Richard, Martha finished for me. Well, they're offering a beginner's workshop this weekend. Nothing fancy, just hand-building techniques. I signed up weeks ago, but you're welcome to join me. Something fluttered in my chest. Not my heart condition, but a long dormant excitement. I'd like that, if it's not too late to register. I'll call Tina this morning. She runs the studio. I nearly dropped my coffee. Tina? Tina Rodriguez? Martha looked surprised. Yes. Do you know her? She and her husband moved here about a year ago. I laughed softly. We met at the lighthouse the night I left. She's part of the reason I found the courage to stay away. Small world, Martha said with a smile. Though not surprising you'd connect with her. Tina has that effect on people. She helps them see possibilities they were blind to before. Later that morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Tina's warm voice filled the line. Beth, Martha told me you're staying with her, and that you might want to join our workshop this weekend? If there's still space, I said hesitantly. For you? Absolutely. After our conversation at the lighthouse, I had a feeling you might find your way to clay eventually. There's something about it that calls to people at crossroads. The workshop was held in a bright, airy studio in the community center's east wing. 8 pottery wheels lined one wall, but for beginners like me, we worked at tables with simple tools and soft clay. 10 of us gathered that Saturday morning, mostly women around my age, though there was one young man with tattoos covering his arms, and a teenage girl who kept checking her phone. "Welcome, everyone," Tina said, her energy immediately filling the room. "Today we're going to focus on the fundamentals of hand building with clay. No pressure, no expectations, just the joy of creating something with your hands." She demonstrated basic techniques: pinching, coiling, slab building, making it look effortless. When it was our turn to try, my first attempts were clumsy. The bowl I tried to shape collapsed repeatedly, the walls too thin in some places, too thick in others. "You're thinking too much," Tina said quietly, stopping beside my workspace. "Clay remembers every touch, every hesitation. Try closing your eyes. Feel it with your fingers instead of scrutinizing it with your eyes." I felt foolish, but I closed my eyes. The sensation changed immediately. Without visual judgment, I could feel the clay responding to my touch, where it needed support, where it wanted to stretch. When I opened my eyes again, I had shaped a small, imperfect, but distinctly bowl-shaped vessel. "There you go," Tina smiled. "The clay knows what it wants to be. We just have to listen." By the end of the 3-hour workshop, I had created 2 small bowls and a wobbly little vase. They were primitive, childlike really, but I felt an irrational pride looking at them. "These will need to dry, then we'll fire them in the kiln," Tina explained. "Next week you can glaze them. The transformation from raw clay to finished pottery is magical. You'll see." As we cleaned up, the teenage girl approached me hesitantly. "Your bowls turned out really nice," she said. "Mine all cracked." I smiled at her. "Thank you. I think it was beginner's luck. I'm only here because my mom thinks I need a hobby besides my phone," she confided. "But it was actually kind of cool. Are you coming back next week?" "I think I will be," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. When Martha and I returned to her cottage, I felt different somehow, calmer, more present in my body. My hands were still coated with a fine film of clay dust, a physical reminder of what I'd created. I couldn't remember the last time I'd made something just for the joy of it. That evening, there was a knock at Martha's door. When she opened it, Richard stood on the porch, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "I need to speak with my wife," he said without preamble. Martha glanced back at me, eyebrows raised in silent question. I nodded, and she stepped aside to let him in. "I'll be upstairs if you need me," she said pointedly, giving Richard a look that made it clear she wasn't to be trifled with. Left. Alone in Martha's small living room, Richard and I regarded each other warily. He looked older somehow, as if the past week had aged him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his normally immaculate clothing was slightly rumpled. "You look well," he said finally, sounding surprised. "I am well," I replied. "The rest has been good for me." He sat down heavily on Martha's sofa. "I read your medical report. Why didn't you tell me it was this serious?" "I tried to, Richard. You weren't listening." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "You can't just walk out after 45 years of marriage because of one oversight." "It wasn't one oversight. It was thousands of them, spanning decades." His expression hardened. "So that's it? You're just going to throw away our entire life together?" I sat down in the armchair across from him, suddenly weary. "I haven't decided anything permanent yet. I just know I need this time apart to think clearly. The children are upset. They don't understand why you're doing this. And you, Richard? Do you understand?" He looked away, his jaw working. "I understand that you're having some kind of episode. The doctor mentioned emotional instability could be a side effect of heart conditions." The familiar dismissal stung, but not as sharply as it once would have. "Is that what you told everyone? That I'm emotionally unstable?" "What else am I supposed to think? You were fine for 45 years and suddenly you're not? I laughed then, a sound without humor. I wasn't fine, Richard. I was invisible. There's a difference. He stood up abruptly. I didn't come here to argue. I came to bring you home where you belong. And if I'm not ready to come home, then I don't know what to tell the Carmichael Foundation Committee. The gala is in 2 weeks, and I'm being honored for my years of service. They're expecting my wife to be there. Of course, Richard's award ceremony. That's what had finally driven him to find me. Not concern for my health, but concern for appearances. I'll think about it, I said finally. Elizabeth, I said I'll think about it, Richard. That's all I can offer right now. After he left, Martha came back downstairs, carrying 2 glasses of wine. Well? She asked, handing me one. He wants me to come to his foundation gala. Appearances, you know. Martha snorted. And what do you want? I stared into my wine glass, watching the light play through the burgundy liquid. I want to finish my pottery projects. I want to see how they turn out after firing. Then that's what you should do, Martha said simply. The next morning, I woke to a text message from Tina. The studio is empty today if you'd like to practice before next weekend's workshop. I'll be there 10:03. No pressure. I found myself drawn back to the studio, to the quiet focus that working with clay demanded. Tina showed me more techniques, guided my hands when I struggled, and shared stories of her own journey with ceramics. I was an accountant for 20 years, she revealed as we worked side by side. Hated every minute of it. When Robert got tenure at the college, I finally had the security to quit and pursue what I really loved. Weren't you scared? I asked, smoothing the rim of the mug I was shaping. Terrified, she admitted with a laugh. I had built this identity as the responsible, practical one. Suddenly becoming an artist in my 40s felt like a betrayal of that self-image. But the old self was the false one, not the new one. Her words resonated deeply. Who was the real Elizabeth Harrington? The dutiful wife and mother I'd been for decades? Or this emerging person with clay-stained hands and a hunger for self-expression? Over the next 2 weeks, I fell into a routine that centered around the pottery studio. Each day, I grew more confident with the clay, and each evening I returned to Martha's cottage feeling more grounded in myself. I started with simple forms, bowls, mugs, small vases. But Tina encouraged me to experiment with more complex shapes, with textures and patterns carved into the clay. When my first pieces emerged from the kiln, transformed from dull gray to vibrant glazed ceramics, I felt a surge of accomplishment unlike anything I'd experienced in years. They weren't perfect. The glaze had run in places, creating unexpected drips, and one bowl had a slight warp, but they were undeniably mine. I had created something from nothing, guided by my own intuition and hands. First firing is always special, Tina said, watching me examine my pieces with wonder. No matter how long you work with clay, nothing compares to that feeling. The night before Richard's gala, I sat at Martha's kitchen table with my phone, staring at the unanswered text he'd sent earlier that day. Car will pick you up at 6 tomorrow. Black tie. Not a question. Not even a please. Just an assumption that I would comply, as I always had. Martha leaned against the counter, watching me. You're still considering going, aren't you? 45 years is a long time, I said, quietly. I can't just erase it overnight. True, she acknowledged, but you can decide not to keep adding to the tally of days you compromise yourself. I looked up at my sister, this woman who had found the courage to remake her life when most people were settling into the familiar. When did you get so wise? She grinned. Somewhere between husband number 2 and 3. I texted Richard. Back. I'll meet you there. The Oak Ridge Country Club ballroom was transformed for the Carmichael Foundation Gala. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. It was exactly the kind of event Richard thrived in, where his status as a prominent community figure was on full display. I had deliberated over what to wear, finally choosing a dress I'd purchased on impulse during a shopping trip with Tina. Midnight. Blue with an asymmetrical neckline, more daring than anything in my usual wardrobe. I'd paired it with silver earrings Martha had loaned me and wore my hair loose around my shoulders instead of in my customary neat chignon. When I walked into the ballroom, I felt eyes turn in my direction. Not because I looked particularly spectacular, though Tina had assured me I did, but because people were curious. Word of my abandonment of Richard had undoubtedly circulated through our social circle. I spotted Richard immediately, standing near the bar in deep conversation with the foundation's chairman. When he saw me, surprise flickered across his face, followed quickly by relief and something else. Appreciation? He excused himself and made his way toward me. "Elizabeth," he said formally, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I said I would think about it," I reminded him. "Yes, well." He cleared his throat, taking in my appearance. "You look different." "Thank you," I said, though it hadn't exactly been a compliment. Richard guided me through the room, his hand at the small of my back in a gesture that once felt protective, but now seemed vaguely possessive. We stopped at various clusters of people, bank executives, foundation board members, old friends, all of whom greeted me with two bright smiles and careful questions about how I was doing. "Beth has been pursuing her artistic interests," Richards explained smoothly when someone asked where I'd been lately, as if my absence had been a planned sabbatical rather than a rupture in our marriage. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of supportive wife that everyone expected. But inside, I felt increasingly disconnected from this world of polite pretense and social performance. These people didn't know me. They knew the version of Elizabeth Harrington that Richard had constructed over 45 years of marriage. Halfway through the evening, as I stood alone while Richard networked, Jennifer appeared at my side. She looked stunning in a sleek black dress, her dark hair, so like Richard's in his youth, swept up elegantly. "Mom," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "I didn't know you'd be here." "Your father is receiving an award," I replied. "It seemed appropriate to attend." She studied me for a moment. "You look different, younger somehow." "New dress," I said with a small smile. "No, it's more than that." She tilted her head. "You seem, I don't know, more present?" The observation surprised me. "Thank you, I think." "Are you coming home after this?" The question was direct, her eyes searching mine. "I don't know yet, Jennifer." She pressed her lips together. "The kids miss you. Sophie asks about you all the time." "I miss them too," I said honestly. "But this time apart has been important for me. I'm learning things about myself." "What things?" How could I explain to my daughter, who had only ever known me as a constant, reliable presence, that I was discovering I was more than that? That beneath the roles of wife, mother, grandmother, there was a person with desires and talents of her own? "I've been taking ceramics classes," I said instead, "making pottery." Jennifer's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Pottery? Since when are you interested in that?" "Since recently. I'm actually quite enjoying it." Before she could respond, there was a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom. Richard, who had been engaged in conversation nearby, suddenly stiffened. I followed his gaze to see what had caught his attention. A woman had entered, tall and elegant in a striking red dress that set her apart from the sea of conservative black and navy. Her silver hair was styled in a sophisticated bob that framed a face still beautiful despite the passage of time. There was something vaguely familiar about her, though I couldn't immediately place her. Is that... Jennifer's voice trailed off in surprise. Eleanor Caldwell, Richard finished, having moved to stand beside us. I had no idea she would be here tonight. And suddenly I placed her, the woman from the photographs in Richard's college yearbook, the serious girlfriend he'd dated before me. The one who'd gone on to marry a wealthy businessman and move abroad. The one he rarely mentioned, but whose name was always spoken with a certain weight. She's on the foundation board now, Jennifer explained, glancing between Richard and me, with a hint of discomfort. Dad, didn't you know? I mentioned running into her at the alumni event last month. Richard straightened his bow tie, a nervous gesture I recognized from countless social events over the years. I must have forgotten. If you'll excuse me, I should say hello. It would be rude not to acknowledge a board member. As he walked toward Eleanor, I watched his transformation, shoulders squaring, stride becoming more purposeful, a certain youthful energy animating his movements. He looked like a man 20 years younger, approaching the woman who had once been the focus of his affections. Mom? Jennifer's concerned voice pulled me back. Are you okay? I'm fine, I assured. Her surprise to discover it was true, watching my husband of 45 years greet his college girlfriend with unmistakable eagerness. I expected to feel jealousy, insecurity, perhaps even anger. Instead, I felt oddly detached, as if observing actors in a play I was no longer part of. Why don't you ever do these outings with Sophie and Lucas anymore? Jennifer asked abruptly, changing the subject. Sophie said you used to take them for ice cream every Wednesday, but you haven't in months. I turned to face my daughter fully. Jennifer, I've been staying at Martha's for the past 2 weeks. Obviously, I couldn't continue our Wednesday outings. No, I mean before that. Sophie said you've been canceling since summer. I stared at her in confusion. Jennifer, I never canceled. Richard told me you and Kevin wanted to enroll the children in additional after-school activities on Wednesdays. He said you specifically asked that I stop picking them up. Jennifer's face reflected genuine shock. What? I never said that. Kevin and I were grateful for those afternoons. It gave us time to catch up on work. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Richard told me it came directly from you. Mom, I would never. She broke off, looking past me to where Richard was still engaged in animated conversation with Eleanor. Why would Dad say that? The answer seemed suddenly painfully obvious. Richard had been gradually isolating me, reducing my connections with the people I loved, increasing my dependence on him. But why? What purpose did it serve to separate me from my grandchildren? I don't know, I said quietly. But I intend to find out. The chairman was calling for attention, announcing that the award ceremony was about to begin. Richard reluctantly excused himself from Eleanor and made his way to the front of the room, stopping to collect me as he passed. Time for the presentation, he murmured, guiding me toward the stage. Remember to smile. As we took our places near the podium, I felt as if I were moving through a dream. Everything felt slightly unreal. The glittering room, the polite applause, Richard's hand gripping mine too tightly. My mind was spinning with this new revelation. What else had he lied about over the years? How many other connections had he severed without my knowledge? Richard accepted his award with his usual polished charm, thanking the foundation, his colleagues, and finally, my devoted wife of 45 years, without whom none of this would have been possible. The crowd applauded, and I smiled mechanically, playing my part. As the formal proceedings concluded and people began to circulate again, I found myself face to face with Eleanor Caldwell. Up close, she was even more striking, tall and poised, with intelligent eyes that assessed me coolly. You must be Elizabeth, she said, extending her hand. I've heard so much about you from Richard. I shook her hand, noting her firm grip. Have you? How strange, since he's barely mentioned you. She laughed, a rich, confident sound. Oh, I'm not surprised. Our history is complicated. But it's all ancient history now. I understand congratulations are in order. 45 years of marriage is quite an achievement. Thank you, I said automatically. Though recently I've been wondering if longevity alone is something to celebrate. Interest sparked in her eyes. How refreshing to hear someone say that. Most people in our circle treat marriage like an endurance sport. The longer you last, the more points you score, regardless of whether you're actually happy. Despite myself, I found I liked her directness. And what about you? I heard you. Married and moved abroad. Divorced now, she said matter-of-factly. 23 years was quite enough of that particular mistake. I've been back in the States for about a year, reconnecting with old friends, serving on a few boards, keeping busy. Like the Carmichael Foundation. Exactly. She gestured with her champagne glass. Though I must admit, seeing Richard again has been an unexpected pleasure. He hasn't changed a bit, still the same charming, ambitious man he always was. I smiled slightly. Oh, I wouldn't say that. We all change over time. Do we? She regarded me thoughtfully. Or do we just become more intensely ourselves? The essence remains the same, just more concentrated as we age, like a reduction sauce. The culinary metaphor surprised a genuine laugh out of me. Perhaps you're right. In which case, it's important to be sure you like the essential flavor to begin with. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled with amusement. Elizabeth Harrington, you are not at all what I expected. No? I raised an eyebrow. What? Did you expect? From the way Richard described you? Someone more conventional, traditional. Ah, I nodded. That would have been the old Elizabeth. You're meeting the new version. Well, I like this version, she said decisively. We should have lunch sometime. The suggestion was so unexpected that I found myself agreeing before I had fully processed it. Eleanor handed me her card from a sleek silver case. Call me, she said with a smile. I have a feeling we have more in common than one might think. As she walked away, Richard appeared at my side, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. What did Eleanor want? He asked too casually. To invite me to lunch, apparently. His eyebrows rose in surprise. That's unexpected. She's not what I imagined, I admitted, based on the little you've told me about her over the years. Richard shifted uncomfortably. As I said, it was all a long time ago. Was it? I studied his face, noting the heightened color in his cheeks, the slight quickening of his breath when he looked in Eleanor's direction. Because you seem quite affected by seeing her again. Don't be ridiculous, Elizabeth, he said stiffly. I was simply surprised to see her here. Now, shall we mingle? The Hendersons were asking after you earlier. As he guided me toward another group of acquaintances, I felt a strange clarity descending. The distance of the past 2 weeks had given me perspective I'd never had before. I could see patterns in our marriage that had been invisible when I was immersed in them, the subtle ways Richard controlled the narrative, the information that reached me, the connections I maintained. Most of all, I could see how I had ceded my identity to him piece by piece over the decades, until there was almost nothing left that was uniquely mine. The Elizabeth who had walked into this ballroom tonight was different. She was reclaiming those pieces, reassembling them into someone new yet familiar. Someone I was beginning to recognize and respect. Later that night, as the event wound down, Richard leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. Come home, Elizabeth, he murmured. This separation has gone on long enough. What will people think? I'm not ready, I said simply. His expression hardened. This isn't just about you. Have you thought about what this is doing to our family? To our reputation in the community? I'm thinking about my health, Richard. And part of that is emotional well-being. And pottery makes you emotionally well? His tone was dismissive. This hobby of yours is tearing our family apart. I looked at my husband of 45 years and felt a profound sadness. No, Richard. The tear happened long ago. I'm just finally acknowledging it. As I left the gala alone, declining his offer of a ride, I felt lighter somehow. The night air was crisp against my skin, and above me, stars punctured the darkness with pinpricks of light. I thought of Tina's words from the pottery studio. The clay knows what it wants to be. We just have to listen. Perhaps the same was true of people. Perhaps Elizabeth Harrington had always known what she wanted to be, beneath the layers of expectations and obligations. And now, finally, I was learning to listen. The revelation about Richard's lie regarding the grandchildren gnawed at me in the days following the gala. I couldn't fathom why my husband would deliberately sever one of my most treasured connections. What purpose did it serve? What else had he misrepresented over our decades together? Martha noticed my preoccupation as I absent-mindedly kneaded a lump of clay at her kitchen table, rolling it between my palms without actually shaping it. "You've been staring at that same ball of clay for 20 minutes, she observed, setting a cup of tea beside me. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I told her about my conversation with Jennifer, about Richard's fabrication regarding the Wednesday afternoons with Sophie and Lucas. That manipulative son of a... Martha caught herself, taking a deep breath. "Sorry, but why would he do that? It makes no sense." "I've been asking myself the same question," I said, finally setting the clay aside. "The only explanation I can think of is that he wanted me more isolated, more dependent on him. But why now, after all these years?" Martha sat down across from me, her expression thoughtful. "When did this start? The cancellations?" I tried to recall the timeline. Around May or June, I think. Sophie mentioned it at the gala, that I'd been canceling since summer. "And what else happened around that time? Any changes in Richard's routine? His behavior?" I thought back to early summer. The Carmichael Foundation appointed its new board members. Richard was particularly invested in it this year. And who's on that board? The connection clicked suddenly. Eleanor Caldwell. Martha leaned back in her chair, a knowing look crossing her face. Bingo. "But that's ridiculous," I protested. "Richard can't possibly still harbor feelings for a college girlfriend after nearly 50 years. "Can't he?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "You saw them together at the gala. How did he act around her?" The image was still clear in my mind. Richard's sudden animation, the way he had straightened his posture, the youthful energy that had seemed to course through him. "Different," I admitted. "Younger, somehow. More. Alive." "And how long? Has it been since you've seen him look at you that way?" The question stung with its accuracy. I couldn't remember the last time Richard had looked at me with genuine excitement, if he ever had. Appreciation for a well-hosted dinner party, perhaps. Satisfaction when I'd dressed appropriately for an important event. But that spark of genuine delight? Never. "You think he's been planning this?" I asked, deliberately distancing me from the family to... "What? Make room for Eleanor?" Martha shrugged. "I don't know if it's that calculated. But men like Richard, men who are used to managing outcomes, orchestrating situations, they often start moving pieces around the board long before they consciously acknowledge why they're doing it." I thought about Richard's behavior over the past months, his increased irritability, his prolonged absences for foundation business, the subtle ways he'd criticized me more frequently. Had he been unconsciously preparing to replace me? The thought should have been devastating, but instead, I felt an odd detachment, like I was analyzing a chess match between strangers. "I need to speak with Jennifer again," I said, reaching for my phone. find out if there were other lies. My daughter agreed to meet me for coffee the next morning at Morning Brew, a small cafe halfway between her home and Martha's cottage. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Mom," she said as I sat down, "before you say anything, I want you to know I spoke with Dad after the gala, and he claims there was a misunderstanding about the Wednesday afternoons. He says he thought I wanted to change the arrangement because of some comment I made about Sophie's schedule being too busy." I studied my daughter's face, so like mine in structure, but with Richard's dark eyes and determined chin. "And do you believe that?" Jennifer fidgeted with her coffee cup. I don't know. It doesn't sound like something I would say. Sophie treasures those afternoons with you." "Were there other things, Jennifer? Other times Richard conveyed messages supposedly from you or your brother that didn't sound right?" She hesitated, and I could see her mentally sorting through interactions. "There was one thing," she finally said. "Last Christmas, Dad told us you wanted to scale back the holiday celebrations, that at your age, the big family gathering was becoming too stressful. We were hurt, but we respected your wishes. That's why we did the smaller dinners separately." My chest tightened. Last Christmas had been the loneliest of my life. For the first time in decades, I hadn't hosted our traditional family gathering. Instead, Richard and I had dined with Brian's family on Christmas Eve and Jennifer's on Christmas Day, brief, stilted affairs that had left me feeling hollow. Richard had presented it as the children's preference, claiming they wanted more intimate celebrations. "I never said that," I told Jennifer, my voice steady despite the pain lancing through me. "I look forward to our family Christmas all year." Jennifer's eyes widened, then narrowed with dawning anger. "Dad said you were feeling your age, that the preparations exhausted you, that you'd confided you couldn't keep up with it anymore. I've never said anything remotely like that. But why would he—" Jennifer broke off, a troubled expression crossing her face. "Mom, what's going on between you and Dad? Really?" I took a deep breath. "I honestly don't know, Jennifer. But I'm discovering that many things I thought were true about our marriage weren't, including how much your father valued it." "Because of Eleanor Caldwell?" she asked directly, surprising me. "You've noticed something?" Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "It's probably nothing. Just when I ran into her at the alumni event, she mentioned she and Dad had been meeting for coffee, reminiscing about old times. She said it so casually, like it was common knowledge. But when I mentioned it to Dad later, he acted like it had only happened once, by accident." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. While I'd been home maintaining our life, Richard had been quietly rebuilding his connection with Eleanor. Not just through foundation meetings, but private coffee dates he'd deliberately concealed from me. "I see," I said softly. "Mom, are you and Dad getting divorced?" Jennifer's question was blunt, her expression braced for the answer. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Right now, I'm focusing on my health, physical and emotional. I'm trying to understand who I am outside of my roles as wife, mother, grandmother. The rest? I can't predict." A tear slipped down Jennifer's cheek. "I've been so wrapped up in my own life, my own problems. I never stopped to think about whether you were happy." "That's not your responsibility, sweetheart." "But it should have been my concern," she insisted. "You've always been there. For all of us. Always asking how we're doing, what we need. And none of us ever asked you the same questions." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's not too late to start now." After my conversation with Jennifer, I felt a new resolve crystallizing within me. Whether Richard had been consciously planning to replace me with Eleanor, or merely responding to a rekindled attraction, the result was the same. He had been systematically undermining my connections to our family, isolating me in preparation for what? Divorce? Abandonment? or just a gradual fading away of my presence in his life? I spent the next week immersed in pottery, channeling my emotional turmoil into the clay. Tina noticed the shift in my work, the forms becoming more complex, the textures more intricate and deliberate. "There's anger in these pieces," she observed one afternoon, running her fingers along the sharply carved pattern on a vase I'd just completed. "But also strength." "Is that bad?" I asked. She smiled. "It's honest. Clay doesn't lie. It reflects what's in your hands, what's in your heart. And right now, your heart has a lot to say." That evening, Robert joined Tina in inviting Martha and me to dinner at their home, a converted carriage house filled with books, art, and an eclectic mix of furnishings that somehow worked harmoniously together. The walls were adorned with Tina's ceramics and works from other artists she admired. It felt like a space where creativity was not just displayed, but actively lived. Over a meal of paella that Robert had prepared, while Tina readily admitted her culinary skills were limited to toast and coffee, the conversation flowed easily. They shared stories of their lives before Oak Ridge, their careers in accounting and academia, their decision to change course in midlife, the resistance they'd faced from family and friends. "My mother was horrified," Tina laughed, refilling our wine glasses. "She kept saying, 'Accountants don't become potters. What will people think?'" "And what did people think?" I asked. Some thought I was having a midlife crisis. Others thought I was brave. But the important thing was, I stopped caring so much about their opinions. For the first time, I was doing something that made me feel fully alive. Fully alive. The phrase echoed in my mind. When was the last time I had felt that way? Perhaps in college before I'd met Richard, when the world had seemed full of possibilities. Before I'd narrowed my existence to fit within the confines of what was expected of a banker's wife. "It's never too late to reinvent yourself," Robert added, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "I've had students in their 80s start new degrees, take up painting, learn languages they've always wanted to speak. The only real barrier is believing you've run out of time. Or believing you don't deserve it," Martha added quietly. The conversation stayed with me for days afterward. Was that my problem? Had I convinced myself I didn't deserve a life of my own making? Had I believed Richard's subtle messaging that my value lay primarily in my service to him and our family? The following Wednesday, I drove to Jennifer's house and picked up Sophie and Lucas after school. Their faces lit up when they saw me waiting. In the car, a reaction that warmed my heart in ways I hadn't expected. "Nana!" Sophie exclaimed, flinging herself into the back seat. "You came back! Are you going to take us for ice cream like before?" "If you'd like," I smiled. "But I had another idea too. How would you feel about trying something new today?" Instead of our usual ice cream parlor, I took them to the community center's pottery studio. Tina had arranged a special session, just for us, setting up a table with child-sized tools and soft clay ready for small hands. "Are we going to make real pottery?" Lucas asked, his 8-year-old eyes wide with fascination. "Real pottery," I confirmed. "And then next week, we can glaze the pieces you make today. They'll be fired in a kiln, that's like a super hot oven, and turned into something you can keep forever." Sophie approached the clay cautiously, poking it with one finger. "It feels weird. Cold, but kind of alive?" "That's exactly right," I told her. Clay has a memory. It remembers every touch, every movement. It's like it has a personality of its own. For the next 2 hours we worked together, rolling, pinching, smoothing, creating. Lucas made a lopsided bowl that he declared would be perfect for his collection of interesting rocks. Sophie crafted a series of tiny animals, each one more detailed than the last. I helped them when needed, but mostly I watched in wonder as they explored this new medium with the uninhibited creativity of childhood. When Jennifer arrived to pick them up, she found us laughing, clay-splattered, and surrounded by an array of small sculptures. "Mom, this is amazing," she said, taking in the scene. "They look like they're having the time of their lives." "Can we come back next week, Mom? Please?" Sophie pleaded. "Nana says we get to paint these with special colors that turn shiny in the fire oven." "The kiln," Lucas corrected importantly. Jennifer's eyes met mine over their heads. "Of course. You can, if Nana's willing to bring you." "Every Wednesday," I promised. "It's our special day." As they gathered their belongings, Jennifer pulled me aside. "This is so much better than ice cream, Mom. Look how engaged they are. How did you know they'd love this?" I smiled. I didn't. I just thought they might enjoy something I've come to love. Sometimes the best gifts we can give each other are new experiences, new ways of seeing the world. She hugged me then, a genuine embrace unlike the perfunctory ones we'd exchanged in recent years. "I've missed you, Mom, the real you. I think maybe you've been missing yourself too." After they left, I stayed in the studio, cleaning up and reflecting on the afternoon. There was a bitter irony in Richard's deception. By separating me from my grandchildren, he had inadvertently created the space for me to discover something vital about myself. And now, in reconnecting with them, I was sharing not just my time, but something authentic, something that came from the person I was becoming rather than the role I had been playing. The days passed with a new rhythm. Mornings in the pottery studio, afternoons with Martha, or occasionally meeting Jennifer for coffee, Wednesdays with the grandchildren. My pieces were improving rapidly, moving beyond simple forms to more expressive sculptural works. Tina suggested I contribute something to the community center's upcoming exhibition. "You have a natural aptitude for this medium," she insisted. "Your pieces show remarkable progress for someone who just started." "They're still amateur efforts," I protested. "Art isn't about technical perfection," Tina countered. "It's about authentic expression, and your work has that in spades. People will respond to it." Reluctantly, I agreed to include 3 pieces in the exhibition: a graceful vase with carved botanical designs, a set of nesting bowls with a gradient of blue glazes that reminded me of deepening water, and a more abstract sculptural piece that had emerged from one of my angrier days, all sharp angles and textured surfaces. The night before the exhibition opening, Richard showed up at Martha's door. "I need to speak with Elizabeth," he told Martha, who regarded him with undisguised suspicion. "It's fine," I assured her. "We can talk on the porch." It was a clear, November evening, crisp but not yet bitter with winter's chill. Richard stood stiffly at the porch railing, looking out at Martha's garden, now mostly dormant except for a few hardy chrysanthemums. "You've been gone almost a month," he said without preamble. "People are beginning to talk." "I imagine they are," I replied calmly. "Brian tells me you've been spending time with the grandchildren, taking them to pottery classes." His tone was neutral, but I sensed the accusation beneath it. "Yes, on Wednesdays. The same day you told me Jennifer no longer wanted me to pick them up." He flinched slightly but didn't address the lie. "Elizabeth, this has gone on long enough." "Whatever. Point you're trying to make has been made. It's time to come home." "Is it?" I studied his profile in the fading light. "Why?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean, why?" "Because it's your home. Because we've been married for 45 years. Because this separation is causing unnecessary pain to our family." "Is that the only reason you want me to come back? Appearances? Convenience? Habit?" Richard turned to face me fully, irritation flashing across his features. "What more do you want from me, Elizabeth? I've respected your need for space. I've managed on my own for weeks. I've even started learning to cook simple meals, for God's sake. What else are you looking for?" The question hung between us, weighted with decades of unspoken expectations, compromises, and silent surrenders. What did I want from Richard, from our marriage, from this life that had somehow slipped past me while I was busy maintaining it for everyone else? I want to be seen, I said finally, the words emerging with quiet certainty. Not as an extension of you, not as a role to be filled, but as a whole person with my own needs, desires, and value. I've spent 45 years being Richard Harrington's wife, and somewhere along the way, I lost Elizabeth entirely. He looked genuinely perplexed. I've always valued you, Elizabeth. You've been an exceptional wife, mother, grandmother. But those are functions, Richard. Roles I've performed. When have you ever valued me for who I am, not what I do for you and the family? His silence was answer enough. I'm in a pottery exhibition tomorrow night, I said, changing direction abruptly. At the community center, 7 o'clock. Richard blinked at the non sequitur. You're exhibiting pottery? 3 pieces. They're not professional quality, but they're mine. I created them. I'd like you to see them. He hesitated, clearly, trying to gauge the significance of the invitation. Will you come home afterward? I don't know, I answered honestly. But I'd like you to see this part of me, the part that exists independent of our marriage. After a moment, he nodded stiffly. I'll be there. The community center's gallery space was transformed for the exhibition, with carefully positioned lighting illuminating each piece. My work was displayed alongside pieces from other students and local artists, including several of Tina's more advanced creations. Though mine were clearly the work of a beginner compared to many others, they had been given respectful placement and proper lighting. Martha arrived early with me, helping set up the refreshment table and arranging the printed programs that listed all the contributing artists. I felt oddly nervous, as if I were about to perform on stage rather than simply stand beside my pottery while people wandered through. You look beautiful, Martha assured me, straightening the collar of the emerald green blouse I'd chosen to wear with sleek black pants. And your work is going to impress everyone. It's not about impressing people, I said. It's about claiming this part of myself publicly, letting people see who I'm becoming. Well, whoever that is, I like her. Martha squeezed my hand encouragingly. The exhibition opened at 7, and soon the gallery was filled with community members, art enthusiasts, and the friends and families of the various artists. Tina worked the room with practiced ease, introducing people, explaining techniques, creating connections between artists and potential buyers. I stood near my display, surprised by how many people stopped to examine my pieces, ask questions about my process, and compliment the work. At 7:30, I spotted Richard entering the gallery. He was impeccably dressed as always, but there was an unfamiliar hesitancy in his manner as he scanned the room, looking for me. When our eyes met, he made his way toward me, pausing briefly to accept a glass of wine from a passing server. Elizabeth, he said formally when he reached me, this is quite an event. Thank you for coming, I replied, genuinely appreciative of the effort it must have cost his pride. His gaze moved to the display beside me, taking in my 3 pieces with careful attention. I watched his face, trying to gauge his reaction. These are... You made these? He asked finally, a note of surprise in his voice. I did. All in the past month. He stepped closer to the abstract sculptural piece, studying the complex textures and sharp angles. This one is unsettling, angry almost. It was an angry day, I acknowledged. That's what I like about clay. It captures emotion, preserves it. Richard turned to me, his expression thoughtful. I had no idea you had this in you. The comment could have been interpreted as either a compliment or a subtle criticism of this new, unexpected facet of my personality. Before I could respond, a familiar voice called my name. Beth, your work is extraordinary. Eleanor Caldwell approached, radiant in a deep purple dress that complemented her silver hair. She moved with the confident grace of a woman comfortable in her skin, drawing eyes from across the room. "Eleanor," I said, surprised. "I didn't know you were interested in ceramics." "I'm on the Arts Council," she explained, then nodded at Richard. "Richard, good to see you again." He straightened, almost imperceptibly. "Eleanor, I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." "Wouldn't miss it," she said breezily. "The Community Center's arts program is one of our foundation's major initiatives, and now I'm doubly glad I came. Beth, these pieces show remarkable talent for someone who just began." Before I could respond, Tina appeared with a small group of people, including a distinguished-looking older man with a camera around his neck. "Beth, this is Henry Winters from the Oak Ridge Gazette," she introduced. He's covering the exhibition for the weekend arts section and is particularly interested in your story. Former kindergarten teacher discovering a talent for ceramics in her 60s. "Oh, I wouldn't say talent," I demurred, feeling self-conscious. "I would," Eleanor interjected firmly. "These pieces have a raw emotional quality that's quite compelling." Henry asked if he could take photographs of me with my work, and then spent several minutes interviewing me about my journey into pottery, listening with genuine interest as I explained how it had become a form of self-discovery. Richard stood, silently at the periphery, watching this exchange with an unreadable expression. After Henry moved on to interview other artists, Eleanor turned back to us. "You know, Beth, the Arts Council is always looking for fresh perspectives. We should have coffee sometime and discuss how you might get involved." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. Despite the complicated dynamics of her history with Richard, I found myself drawn to Eleanor's directness and evident passion for the arts. Richard cleared his throat. "Eleanor, might I have a word with you privately? There's a foundation matter I'd like to discuss." She raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course. Beth, we'll continue this conversation later. Your work is truly impressive." As they walked away, I watched Richard's body language, the slight lean toward Eleanor as they spoke, the animated gestures, the focused attention he rarely showed in conversation with me. They looked right together somehow, two sophisticated, accomplished people with a shared history and evident chemistry. Surprisingly, the observation didn't wound me as it might have just weeks earlier. Instead, I felt a curious sense of clarity. Richard and I had built a life together based on complementary roles rather than genuine connection. He had needed a supportive wife to maintain his home and social standing. I had needed the security and purpose that came with being needed. But neither of us had truly seen or cherished the person behind the role. Perhaps Eleanor did see the real Richard. And perhaps that wasn't something I needed to fight against anymore. The exhibition continued for another hour, a steady stream of visitors examining the artwork, engaging in conversations, enjoying the sense of community that filled the space. I found myself drawn into discussions about technique, inspiration, the emotional aspects of creating with clay. For the first time in my adult life, people were speaking to me about something I had created, something that expressed my own vision rather than simply fulfilling an expected function. As the event wound down, I looked for Richard, curious about his impression of the evening. I found him and Eleanor deep in conversation in a quiet corner of the gallery, their heads bent close together, sharing what appeared to be a private joke. They looked like teenagers, wrapped in their own world, radiating an energy that made others instinctively give them space. I turned away, not wanting to intrude on whatever was happening between them. Instead, I helped Tina and the other organizers begin the cleanup process, collecting empty glasses, rearranging chairs, thanking departing guests. Richard approached just as I was about to leave with Martha. "Elizabeth," he said formally, "the exhibition was illuminating. I had no idea. You had developed such a hobby." "It's more than a hobby, Richard," I corrected gently. It's become a passion, a way of expressing things I've kept bottled up for decades. He nodded stiffly. Will you be coming home now? The question hung between us, weighted with everything unsaid. In his eyes, I could see not longing for my presence but concern for appearances, for routine, for the comfortable predictability of our shared life. Not tonight, I said finally. I need more time. Time for what, precisely? A hint of frustration crept into his voice. To play with clay? To hide at your sister's house? To punish me for whatever perceived slights you're harboring? To figure out who I am, I answered simply. And what I want the rest of my life to look like. His jaw tightened. And what about what I want? What about our anniversary next month? 45 years, Elizabeth. Are you planning to throw that away for this? He gestured dismissively toward my pottery display. No, Richard, I said, suddenly weary. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm trying to find something I lost. Something precious. And what would that be? I met his gaze steadily. Myself. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, a flash of genuine emotion beneath the controlled exterior. But it was gone so quickly I couldn't identify it. Regret? Anger? Fear? Or perhaps just impatience with what he saw as my inexplicable behavior. I'll see you at the anniversary dinner, I said finally. We have reservations at the lighthouse. As always, 7 o'clock. He nodded curtly. I'll pick you up at 6:30. As he walked away, I noticed Eleanor watching us from across the room, her expression thoughtful. She caught my eye and offered a small, sympathetic smile before turning back to her conversation with a gallery patron. Martha appeared at my side, car keys in hand. Ready to go? Yes, I said, feeling the weight of the evening's emotions settling in my bones. I think I am. On the drive back to her cottage, Martha glanced at me curiously. So, what was it like seeing Richard and his ex together? Illuminating, I echoed Richard's earlier description. They have a connection he and I never had. A spark. And how do you feel about that? I gazed out the window at the passing streetlights, each one creating a brief glow in the darkness before fading away. Sad in some ways. 45 years is a long time to spend with someone who might have been happier with someone else. But also, relieved maybe? Like I'm finally seeing the truth of my marriage clearly, without illusions. And what truth is that? That it was based on roles, not love. That we gave each other what we thought we were supposed to want, not what we truly needed. Martha reached over and squeezed my hand. That's a painful realization at any age. But necessary, I said softly. Especially now, when I may have less time ahead than behind. I don't want to waste another day living someone else's version of my life. We drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As Martha's cottage came into view, a sense of peace settled over me. I didn't know what the future held, whether my marriage would survive this transformation, whether Richard and Eleanor would act on whatever was kindling between them, whether my newfound passion for pottery would continue to fulfill me. But, for the first time in decades, I felt fully present in my own life, authoring my own story rather than playing a supporting role in someone else's, and that, I realized, was worth whatever uncertainty lay ahead. The week after the exhibition, I discovered the first of what I would come to call my 3 truths. It happened unexpectedly while sorting through some old financial documents Martha had stored in her attic. I need to understand my financial situation, I explained, when she questioned why I wanted to review papers from years ago. If I'm going to make decisions about my future, I need to know exactly where I stand. Martha had nodded, understanding. Immediately. Smart, I should have done that before my first divorce. Would have saved myself a lot of heartache and about $50,000. The banker's box she brought down from the attic was dusty, but intact, filled with documents I'd given her for safekeeping over the years, copies of our tax returns, investment statements, property deeds, and insurance policies. Among them was a folder labeled Inheritance Mother that contained details of the modest but meaningful sum I'd received after our mother passed away 15 years earlier. I remembered the inheritance clearly, $175,000, which had seemed like a fortune to me at the time. Richard had insisted we invest it rather than spend it. "This is your security," he'd said. "We'll put it somewhere safe, let it grow. It'll be there if you ever need it." I had agreed, trusting his financial expertise. The folder contained the original documentation of those investments, mutual funds, bonds, a small real estate investment trust. But what caught my eye was a transfer form dated just 6 months after the initial investments were made. It showed the entire portfolio being liquidated and transferred to a different account number that I didn't recognize. Frowning, I searched through the other papers, looking for any follow-up statements or explanations. There were none. "Martha," I called down the stairs. "Do you have any more recent financial documents? Anything from the past 14 years or so?" "No, that's everything you ever gave me," she replied, appearing at the bottom of the attic stairs. "Why? What's wrong?" I descended with the folder in hand. "I can't find any record of what happened to my inheritance after the first 6 months. There's a transfer form, but no indication of where the money went." Martha's expression darkened. "Let me see that." She examined the form with narrowed eyes. "This account number, it's not one of yours?" "Not that I recognize. All our joint accounts had distinctive numbers that started with our wedding date. This is completely different." "Could it be a firm account? Something at Richard's bank?" "Possibly," I said, but a cold feeling was spreading through my chest. "I need to find out." That afternoon, I visited Connecticut National Bank, where Richard had worked for most of his career before retiring. Though he was no longer employed there, his reputation still carried weight. The young manager who greeted me was eager to assist Mrs. Harrington in any way he could. "I'm trying to track an old account," I explained, showing him the transfer form. "This dates back 15 years, but I need to understand where these funds ended up." He frowned slightly. "This account format is unusual for our bank. Let me look into it for you." After several minutes of typing and frowning at his computer screen, he looked up with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington, but this doesn't appear to be one of our accounts. The numbering system is different from what we've used, even historically." "Could it be from another financial institution?" "Possibly. The format looks like it might be from Meridian Trust, actually. They were acquired by First Bank about 10 years ago." I thanked him and headed directly to the local First Bank branch. There, after explaining my situation to a sympathetic manager, I learned the truth. The account had indeed belonged to Meridian Trust, but it wasn't in my name. It was a personal account belonging solely to Richard Harrington. My inheritance, the money my mother had specifically left to me, her daughter, had been transferred into Richard's personal account merely months after he had promised to invest it for my security. The revelation left me numb. I sat in my car, in the bank parking lot, staring at the documentation the manager had provided. The account had been closed years ago, the funds withdrawn gradually over time. My inheritance was long gone, spent by my husband on who knows what, without my knowledge or consent. It wasn't even the money itself that wounded me so deeply. It was the casual betrayal, the ease with which Richard had appropriated something that was rightfully mine while pretending to protect it for me, and I had never questioned him, never asked for statements or updates. I had trusted him completely. First truth, my husband had stolen my inheritance. When I returned to Martha's cottage, I found Tina waiting there, excited to show me photographs. from the exhibition that had been published in the Oak Ridge Gazette. Her enthusiasm dimmed when she saw my expression. "Beth, what's wrong?" I told them both what I had discovered. Martha's reaction was predictably fiery, a stream of colorful expletives followed by offers to confront Richard immediately. Tina's response was more measured but no less supportive. "Financial infidelity is just as serious as sexual infidelity," she said quietly. "It's a profound breach of trust." "I feel like such a fool," I admitted. "All these years, I just assumed Richard was handling our finances responsibly, honestly. What else don't I know? What else has he hidden from me?" "There's one way to find out," Tina suggested. "Have you considered hiring someone to look into your financial history more thoroughly?" The idea had merit. Through Robert's colleague at the college, I was put in touch with a forensic accountant who specialized in divorce cases. Melissa Chen was a petite, precise woman in her 40s who listened to my story without judgment. "Financial deception in long-term marriages is more common than you might think," she told me in her tidy office. "Especially in relationships with traditional divisions of labor, where one spouse handles all financial matters." "Can you help me understand what I'm actually entitled to?" I asked. "What's mine? What's ours? What might be hidden?" "I can try," she said. "But I'll need your authorization to access financial records, tax filings, property documents, everything I can legally obtain. It will take time, and it won't be inexpensive." "I understand," I said, signing the authorization form she placed before me. But at this point, knowledge is more valuable to me than money. Over the next 2 weeks, I immersed myself in pottery while Melissa worked behind the scenes, piecing together the financial puzzle of my marriage. My heart condition, surprisingly, had stabilized with the regular medication and perhaps, as my doctor suggested, the reduction in chronic stress. I felt physically stronger than I had in months, though emotionally, I remained in a strange limbo, detached from my old life but not yet fully situated in a new one. The Wednesday pottery sessions with Sophie and Lucas became the highlight of my week. Their uninhibited creativity inspired my own work, which was evolving rapidly under Tina's guidance. I had begun experimenting with more sculptural forms, creating pieces that expressed emotions I had suppressed for decades, pieces that felt like visual representations of the woman I was becoming. "You should apply to the Winter Arts Festival," Tina suggested one afternoon as we worked side by side in the studio. "Your work is strong enough now." "That's a juried exhibition," I protested. "For real artists." "You are a real artist," she countered. "The only difference between you and the others is they've been doing it longer. But your voice, what you're expressing through your work, that's what matters. And yours is authentic and compelling." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. To submit my work for professional judgment, to put my newly emerging self on display so publicly, it represented a commitment to this new path that I wasn't entirely sure I was ready to make. But before I could decide about the festival application, Melissa Chen called with an update on her investigation. "Mrs. Harrington, I've found something you should see. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" When I arrived, Melissa had spread a series of documents across her desk: bank statements, property records, and what appeared to be incorporation papers for a business entity I'd never heard of. 3 years ago, she began without preamble, your husband established a limited liability company called RH Ventures. The company then purchased a waterfront property on Sycamore Lane. That's in Harbor Point, I said, recognizing the exclusive neighborhood just outside Oak Ridge. But we don't own property there. According to these records, RH Ventures does, Melissa continued. It's a 3-bedroom condominium valued at approximately $2 million. The property was purchased with funds from an investment account that was technically joint, but which you appear to have never accessed directly. I stared at the documents, trying to process this information. Why would Richard buy a condominium without telling me? We have no need for another property. Melissa's expression remained professionally neutral. Mrs. Harrington, the utility bills for this property show consistent usage over the past 3 years. Someone has been living there. Who? I can't determine that from financial records alone. But there are regular payments from your husband's personal account to a local cleaning service for this address, as well as furniture deliveries, grocery deliveries, and other household expenses. The implication was clear, but I needed to see for myself. After leaving Melissa's office, I drove directly to the address listed on the property documents, a sleek modern building overlooking the harbor. The security guard in the lobby seemed accustomed to admitting visitors without much scrutiny, merely asking which unit I was visiting. 12B, I said, reading from the document in my hand. Richard Harrington's unit. Oh, Mr. Harrington, he nodded. Go right up. The elevator is to your left. My heart pounded as I rode the elevator to the 12th floor. What would I find? Who would answer if I knocked? Part of me expected, perhaps even hoped, to discover that Richard had been having an affair, that this was simply a love nest for clandestine meetings. As painful as that would be, it would make sense in a way that his other deceptions hadn't. But when I reached 12B, I didn't knock. Instead, I stood there, frozen with indecision. Did I want to know what was behind that door? Did I want to confront whoever might be inside? And what right did I have to demand entry to a property that, legally speaking, belonged to Richard's company rather than our marriage? As I stood there, the elevator down the hall chimed, and I instinctively stepped back, moving toward the stairwell door to avoid being seen. Through the small window in the door, I watched as the elevator opened and Eleanor Caldwell stepped out, carrying grocery bags. She walked directly to Unit 12B, set the bags down, extracted a key from her purse, and unlocked the door with the casual familiarity of someone returning home. Second truth, Richard had been maintaining a separate household for Eleanor for years. I slipped into the stairwell before she could notice me, my mind reeling with this new information. The condominium, the secret expense account, the lies about picking up the grandchildren, it all formed a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. Richard had been systematically creating a parallel life, one that included Eleanor, but excluded me. But how long had this been going on? Eleanor had supposedly only returned to Oak Ridge a year ago, according to what Jennifer had told me. Yet, the condominium had been purchased 3 years earlier. Had they maintained contact all this time? Had Richard been planning this reunion for years? Back at Martha's cottage, I shared my discovery with her and Tina, who had come over for dinner. Their reactions mirrored my own mixture of shock and strange validation. So it wasn't just a rekindled college romance, Martha said, pouring herself another glass of wine. This was calculated, planned. We don't know that for certain, Tina cautioned. The condominium might have been purchased as an investment, initially. Eleanor might have only recently begun living there. But why the secrecy? I asked. Why not tell me about the property, the company? Why distance me from the grandchildren, if not to create space for this other relationship? There's only one way to find out, Martha said firmly. You need to confront Richard directly. The thought made my stomach clench. Not yet, I said. I need more information. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I face him. That night, unable to sleep, I sat at Martha's kitchen table, reviewing everything I had learned. The financial deception, the secret property, the calculated separation of me from our family. Each revelation peeled back another layer of our marriage, exposing the rot that had been growing beneath the surface for years, perhaps decades. Yet alongside the pain of these discoveries, I felt a strange, growing clarity. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had surrounded me for so long was lifting, revealing hard truths, but also a path forward, one that wasn't dependent on Richard or our marriage, but on my own strength and newly awakened sense of purpose. The next morning, I received a call from Brian, who rarely reached out directly. "Mom," he began awkwardly, "I'm calling about the anniversary dinner next week. Dad mentioned you might not be there, and I wanted to check if that's true." "I told your father I would attend," I replied. "Why would he say otherwise?" Brian hesitated. "He said things between you two have been strained, that you might prefer to skip the celebration this year. He suggested we wait until you're feeling better before planning any family gatherings." Another lie. Another attempt to separate me from our children during what should have been a significant family milestone. "Brian, I fully intend to be at the anniversary dinner," I said firmly. "In fact, I think it's important that all of us are there. You, Jennifer, your families. 45 years of marriage deserves acknowledgement, don't you think?" "Of course," he agreed quickly. "I'll let Jen know." We were both confused by Dad's suggestion. After we hung up, I called the lighthouse to confirm our reservation. The maitre d' remembered me from my solo dinner weeks earlier. "Ah, Mrs. Harrington. Yes, we have your anniversary dinner booked for next Friday at 7. Mr. Harrington specifically requested the private dining room and confirmed a party of 12. 12? I repeated, puzzled. That seems high. It should be 9. My husband and me, our 2 children and their spouses, and our 4 grandchildren. There was a pause, the sound of computer keys clicking. Mr. Harrington's most recent. Confirmation included additional guests, but I can adjust the reservation if you prefer. No, I said slowly. That won't be necessary. Thank you for confirming. Who were the additional guests? Had Richard invited friends to our anniversary dinner without mentioning it to me? Or was it possible he had invited Eleanor? The thought seemed absurd. Even Richard wouldn't be so bold as to invite his secret companion to celebrate his wedding anniversary. Yet after everything I had discovered, I couldn't dismiss the possibility entirely. The week leading up to our anniversary was filled with pottery, a commission Tina had helped me secure for a set of serving dishes for a local restaurant, my regular sessions with the grandchildren, and preliminary work on my application for the Winter Arts Festival. These activities kept my hands busy and my mind focused, preventing me from dwelling too much on the upcoming dinner and what it might reveal. The morning of our anniversary, I woke early in Martha's guest room, watching the sunrise cast golden light across the lake. 45 years ago, I had awakened as Elizabeth Pierce for the last time, filled with nervous excitement about becoming Elizabeth Harrington. I had been 22, naive, trusting, and deeply in love with the idea of the life Richard had promised me. Now, at 67, I faced the possibility that the life I had lived was built on deceptions I hadn't been equipped to recognize. The woman in the mirror was different now, hair silver rather than brown, face lined with decades of experiences, eyes sharper, more discerning. But the heart beneath was stronger too, more resilient than I had ever given it credit for. I dressed with particular care that evening, choosing a silk dress in a deep teal color that Martha had convinced me to purchase during a shopping trip the previous week. It was more modern and flattering than anything in my usual wardrobe, with an asymmetrical neckline and a flowing skirt that moved beautifully when I walked. I wore my hair loose around my shoulders, and for the first time in years, applied makeup with a deliberate eye toward enhancing rather than merely presenting a proper appearance. "You look stunning," Martha declared when I came downstairs. "Absolutely." Radiant. "I feel strange," I admitted. "Like I'm dressing for a confrontation rather than a celebration." "Maybe it's both," she said wisely. "The end of one chapter, the beginning of another." Richard was punctual, arriving at Martha's at precisely 6:30 as we had agreed. His expression when I opened the door was one of genuine surprise, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. "Elizabeth," he said after a moment, "you look different." "Thank you," I replied, uncertain whether it was meant as a compliment. Shall we go? The drive to the lighthouse was mostly silent. Richard made a few attempts at small talk, comments about the weather, a passing reference to a mutual acquaintance we had seen at the country club, a question about whether I was still playing with clay. I answered politely, but briefly. My mind focused on the evening ahead and the discoveries it might bring. When we arrived at the restaurant, the maitre d' escorted us to the private dining room, where several members of our family were already gathered. Jennifer and Kevin stood near the windows with Sophie and Lucas. Melissa, Brian's wife, was helping Tyler adjust his tie while Amy tapped away at her phone. Brian was engaged in conversation with a middle-aged woman I didn't immediately recognize. A friend of the family, perhaps, or a colleague from his law firm. "Mom!" Jennifer exclaimed, coming forward to embrace me. "You look amazing!" "Doesn't she look amazing, Dad?" Richard murmured in agreement, his attention already shifting to greeting the others. I moved through the room, accepting hugs from my grandchildren, noting with pride how handsome Tyler looked in his first proper suit, how much Amy had grown since I'd last seen her, how Sophie's eyes lit up when she spotted me. "Nana, I brought you something," she whispered, pressing a small package wrapped in tissue paper into my hands. I made it in our pottery class. I unwrapped it carefully to find a small, perfectly formed heart, glazed in shades of blue that reminded me of the ocean. "Oh, Sophie," I breathed. "It's beautiful." "Thank you, sweetheart." "Tina helped me with the glaze," she admitted, "but I made it all by myself. It's to say I love you." I hugged her tightly, blinking back sudden tears. Whatever else happened tonight, this small clay heart represented something true and precious that could never be taken from me. As more guests arrived, I realized that Richard had indeed invited 3 additional people: Eleanor, as I had half expected, and an older couple I recognized as board members from the Carmichael Foundation. They entered together, laughing comfortably, clearly having come in the same car. Eleanor spotted me immediately and approached with her characteristic directness. "Beth, happy anniversary," she said, kissing my cheek as if we were old friends. "What a milestone. You look absolutely lovely." "Thank you, Eleanor," I replied, studying her carefully. Did she know about the condominium? Was she aware that I had seen her there? Her expression revealed nothing but polite warmth. Richard joined us, placing a proprietary hand at the small of Eleanor's back. "Elizabeth, you remember John and Margaret Whitman from the foundation. They were kind enough to join us this evening." The Whitmans offered polite congratulations, and I thanked them for coming, all the while noting the easy familiarity with which Richard and Eleanor stood together, like a long-established couple, comfortable in their shared space. My children were watching too, I noticed. Jennifer's brow was furrowed in confusion, while Brian kept glancing between his father and Eleanor with poorly concealed concern. As we were seated for dinner, I found myself at one end of the table with Richard. At the other, Eleanor placed conspicuously at his right hand. The arrangement felt deliberate, symbolic even, a physical manifestation of the emotional distance that had grown between us. The meal progressed with the formal elegance the lighthouse was known for. Multiple courses were served, wine flowed freely, and conversation moved in the careful patterns of a family gathering where tensions simmered beneath the surface, but were not openly acknowledged. The grandchildren, bored with adult conversation, entertained themselves with the small electronic devices their parents had wisely brought along. Richard held court at his end of the table, sharing anecdotes from our early marriage that had been polished over the years into performative reminiscences rather than authentic memories. It was during dessert, a delicate lemon tart paired with champagne, that Richard rose to his feet, tapping his glass for attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward him. "I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight to celebrate 45 years of marriage," he began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man accustomed to public speaking. When Elizabeth and I met at college, I knew immediately she was special, kind, supportive, the perfect partner for the life I envisioned. He paused, his gaze sweeping the table but not quite meeting my eyes. Over the years, Elizabeth has been the foundation of our family, the steady presence that allowed me to build my career, that nurtured our children, that maintained our home. For that, I will always be grateful. The words were appropriate, even generous, but something in his tone made me tense. This didn't sound like an anniversary toast. It sounded like a eulogy. However, Richard continued, confirming my unease, life has a way of bringing unexpected turns. Sometimes we find ourselves revisiting paths not taken, reconnecting with parts of ourselves we thought were long gone. A strange hush fell over the room. Jennifer was staring at her father with wide eyes, while Brian had gone very still, his hand tightening around his wine glass. Richard turned toward Eleanor, his expression softening in a way I had rarely, if ever, seen directed at me. Some of you know that Eleanor and I were close in college, before circumstances took us in different directions. When she returned to Oak Ridge last year, we reconnected as friends, but it quickly became apparent that the connection we once shared had never truly faded. The implication hung in the air, stunning in its audacity. At my anniversary dinner, surrounded by our family, my husband was publicly acknowledging a romantic connection with another woman, but Richard wasn't finished. To my astonishment, and judging by the gasps around the table, everyone else's, he reached into his pocket, extracted a small velvet box, and moved to stand beside Eleanor's chair. "Life offers few second chances," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "I don't intend to waste this one." He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that caught the light, sending prisms dancing across the white tablecloth. "Eleanor Caldwell, I've loved you for 50 years. Will you marry me?" The room erupted in confused exclamations. Jennifer looked horrified, half rising from her chair before Kevin placed a restraining hand on her arm. Brian was shaking his head in disbelief. The grandchildren, sensing the adults' distress, looked up from their devices with wide, confused eyes. Eleanor, to her credit, appeared as shocked as everyone else. Her face flushed, her hand flew to her throat, and she stared at Richard with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Part surprise, part embarrassment, but also, unmistakably, a flash of pleasure. "Richard," she finally managed, "this is hardly the appropriate moment." "It's exactly the right moment," he insisted. "Everyone who matters to me is here. I want them all to know how I feel, to understand the choice I'm making." It was as if I weren't even in the room. As if 45 years of marriage could be erased by this grand theatrical gesture. As if our anniversary dinner were merely a convenient gathering of witnesses for Richard's new beginning, rather than a celebration of our shared past. The surreal quality of the moment held me immobile for several seconds. Then, with a clarity that felt almost supernatural, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I stood up, my chair scraping slightly against the floor. The sound drew all eyes to me, including Richard's, who had the grace to look momentarily abashed, as if suddenly remembering my existence. "I believe," I said, my voice steady and surprisingly strong, "that before anyone answers that proposal, there are 3 truths that need to be acknowledged." Third truth: in that moment, facing my husband of 45 years as he proposed to another woman at our anniversary dinner, I realized I was finally, completely free. The private dining room at the lighthouse fell utterly silent. Every face turned toward me, shocked, uncomfortable, curious. Richard's expression shifted from momentary embarrassment to indignation, his brows drawing together in that familiar way that had always signaled his displeasure. But for once, his disapproval held no power over me. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "this is hardly the time." On the contrary, I interrupted, surprising everyone, including myself. If you can propose to another woman at our anniversary dinner, surely I can speak my truth in the same venue. Eleanor at least had the grace to look mortified. She placed her hand on Richard's arm. Richard, perhaps we should continue this conversation privately. No, I said firmly. I think we've all had enough privacy and secrets. It's time for honesty. I looked around the table at our family, our children with their mixture of horror and confusion, our grandchildren watching with wide eyes, absorbing every word and gesture. I apologize to all of you for what is clearly becoming an uncomfortable evening. But some things need to be said. Jennifer started to rise. Mom, maybe we should take the kids and— Please stay, I requested softly. What I have to say concerns all of you. I turned back to Richard, who remained standing beside Eleanor, the velvet ring box still open in his hand. My first truth? Richard, is that you stole my inheritance 15 years ago? A collective gasp went around the table. Richard's face paled slightly. The money my mother left me, $175,000 that you claimed to invest for my security, you transferred it to your personal account 6 months after receiving it. You spent it, all of it, without my knowledge or consent. That's absurd, Richard scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. I invested that money as promised. If you'd ever bothered to ask about it— I have the bank records, I said calmly. The transfer forms, the account statements. I know exactly what happened to that money, and it wasn't invested for my benefit. Brian looked stricken. Dad, is this true? As a lawyer, he would understand immediately the legal and ethical implications of what I was describing. Richard's jaw tightened. He set the ring box down on the table with a sharp click. Your mother is clearly emotional and confused. Financial? Matters are complex, and she's never had a head for them. Whatever she thinks she's discovered has been misinterpreted. My second truth, I continued as if he hadn't spoken, concerns the condominium on Sycamore Lane, the one purchased by RH Ventures 3 years ago. Now Richard visibly flinched. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed as she turned to look at him. 3 years ago? She repeated. Richard, you told me you bought the condo just before I moved back to Oak Ridge last year. So she hadn't known the full timeline either. Interesting. The property records are quite clear, I said. The 3-bedroom waterfront condominium was purchased by your company 3 years ago, Richard. The same company that doesn't appear anywhere in our joint financial statements, despite being funded by our marital assets. What exactly are you suggesting? Richard demanded, his composure cracking. That I've been planning some elaborate deception for years? That's preposterous. Is it? I asked quietly. Then explain why you lied to me about the Wednesday afternoons with our grandchildren. Explain why you told the children I wanted to scale back our family Christmas traditions when I never said any such thing. Explain why you've been systematically isolating me from our family while establishing a separate household. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by Sophie's small voice. Grandpa said you were too tired to take us for ice cream anymore, Nana. He said you needed to rest because you're old. I felt a surge of profound sadness for my grandchildren, caught in the crossfire of adult deceptions. I was never too tired for you, sweetheart. Never. Richard's face had gone from pale to flushed, anger replacing his initial shock. This is outrageous. You've been acting irrationally for months, Elizabeth, moving out, neglecting your responsibilities, taking up with that Potter woman. Now, you're publicly humiliating me with these wild accusations. This is exactly why I've been concerned about your mental state. The familiar tactic, deflection, gaslighting, questioning my sanity, washed over me without effect. I had anticipated it, expected it even. But the Richard standing before me now, defensive and blustering, seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than the man who had dominated my life for decades. My third truth, I said, my voice gaining strength, is the simplest but most important. I don't need you anymore, Richard. I don't need this marriage. I don't need your approval or your protection or your financial support. For the first time in 45 years, I'm standing on my own, and I've discovered I'm stronger than I ever knew. The declaration hung in the air, clear and undeniable. Around the table, expressions shifted. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, while Brian looked at me with something approaching admiration. Eleanor, still seated beside Richard's empty chair, studied me with undisguised interest, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Richard, however, seemed unable to process what was happening. His mouth opened and closed, searching for the familiar patterns of control that had always worked before. "You're making a scene," he finally managed, his voice lowered but intense. "This is embarrassing for everyone. We can discuss our private matters at home. I'm not coming home, Richard. I haven't been home for weeks, and you've barely noticed my absence except as an inconvenience to your routine. That tells me everything I need to know about the true nature of our marriage." I turned to Eleanor, who was watching this exchange, with visible discomfort. "Eleanor, I don't blame you for any of this. Whether Richard has been planning your reunion for years or opportunistically seized the chance when you returned to Oak Ridge doesn't really matter. What matters is that I finally understand the role I've played in my own life, a supporting character rather than the protagonist." Eleanor nodded slowly, a flicker of genuine respect crossing her features. "I never intended to cause pain. Beth, when Richard and I reconnected, he told me your marriage had been essentially over for years, that you lived separate lives under the same roof. Another convenient fiction," I acknowledged, "but one I inadvertently helped create by disappearing into the background of my own existence." Richard made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. "Elizabeth, you're clearly unwell. Your heart condition, the medication, it's affecting your judgment. Let me take you home and we can sort this out privately." I almost laughed at the transparent maneuver. My heart condition improved dramatically once I removed the primary source of stress in my life. You, Richard. I gathered my purse and the small clay heart Sophie had given me. "I won't be requiring a ride. Martha is waiting for me outside." Jennifer stood quickly. "Mom, wait. Don't go like this." I smiled at my daughter, touched by her concern. "I'm not disappearing, Jennifer. I'm just choosing a different path. You and the children will always be part of my life if you want to be." "Of course we do," she said firmly. "We love you." "And I love you all," I assured her, glancing around at the family members whose expressions ranged from shock to confusion to dawning understanding. "This isn't about rejecting family. It's about reclaiming myself." I addressed the table. "One last time. I apologize for the disruption to what should have been a celebration. But perhaps it is a celebration after all, just of a different kind of milestone than we anticipated." Then I turned and walked out of the private dining room, head high, steps steady. The maitre d' watched with barely concealed curiosity as I passed through the main restaurant, no doubt wondering what drama had unfolded in the Harrington anniversary dinner. Outside, Martha's car was idling by the entrance just as promised. She leaned across to open the passenger door, her expression a mixture of concern and eagerness. "Well," she asked as I slid into the seat, "how bad was it?" "Illuminating," I replied, feeling surprisingly calm. "Richard proposed to Eleanor in front of everyone." "He did what?" Martha nearly shouted, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. "That absolute—" "And I told everyone about the inheritance, the condo, and my decision to leave the marriage," I continued. "So all in all, a memorable anniversary." Martha stared at me for a moment, then burst into laughter. "Beth. Harrington, who are you and what have you done with my predictable proper sister?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I set her free. As we drove away from the lighthouse, I didn't look back. For 45 years, that restaurant had been the site of anniversary dinners that marked the passage of time without acknowledging the slow erosion of my identity. Tonight, it had become the backdrop for my Declaration of Independence. Messy, uncomfortable, but ultimately liberating. Back at Martha's cottage, I kicked off my shoes and accepted the glass of wine she poured for me. We sat on her porch swing, wrapped in light blankets against the November chill, listening to the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore. "Do you think he'll actually marry her?" Martha asked after a while. "I have no idea," I admitted. "But I'm surprised to find I don't really care. Their story belongs to them now. I'm focused on writing my own." My phone buzzed with incoming text messages, several from Jennifer, one from Brian, and surprisingly, one from Melissa, Brian's wife, who had always kept a polite distance. I read Jennifer's first. "Mom, we're all in shock, but I'm also really proud of you. Can we talk tomorrow? Love you." Brian's was more reserved, but supportive in his lawyer-like way. "Dad's behavior was inexcusable. Let me know if you need legal advice going forward." Melissa's message touched me unexpectedly. "Beth, I've always admired your grace, but tonight I admired your courage even more. Whatever comes next, please know you have allies in this family." There was nothing from Richard, which didn't surprise me. His pride would be too wounded for any immediate communication. In time, we would need to have practical conversations about the dissolution of our marriage, the division of assets, the legal ending of a union that had emotionally concluded long ago. But tonight, I was content to let the dust settle on the rubble of what we had built together. "What happens now?" Martha asked, gently pushing the swing with her foot. "Practically speaking? Divorce, obviously. I'll need to find a permanent place to live, sort out finances, establish my new normal. And less practically speaking?" I smiled into the darkness. "I'm going to apply to the Winter Arts Festival. I'm going to take Sophie and Lucas to pottery class every Wednesday. I'm going to see what it feels like to live a life of my own, choosing." Martha squeezed my hand. "Good. It's about damn time." The aftermath of the anniversary dinner unfolded in ways both expected and surprising. As predicted, Richard attempted damage control, telling friends and acquaintances that I had suffered a mental break brought on by my heart condition and medication. Few seemed to believe him, particularly after Brian and Jennifer made no effort to conceal their anger at his behavior. Eleanor, to her credit, declined the hasty proposal. According to Jennifer, who had reluctantly agreed to have coffee with her, Eleanor had been genuinely shocked by Richard's public display and dismayed to learn about the condominium's true history. She had moved out of the Sycamore Lane property and was reconsidering her relationship with a man who had shown himself capable of such calculating deception. "She actually asked about you," Jennifer reported during one of our increasingly frequent lunches. "Wanted to know if you were doing okay. Said she respected how you handled yourself that night." "That's generous of her," I acknowledged. "I meant what I said. I don't blame Eleanor for any of this. She was working with the information Richard provided, just as I was for all those years." The divorce proceedings began with predictable tension, but moved forward steadily. Richard initially contested my claims about the financial deceptions, but faced with the documented evidence Melissa Chen had compiled, his lawyers eventually counseled a more cooperative approach. The settlement negotiations were still ongoing, but I felt confident I would emerge with enough to live comfortably, if not lavishly. In the meantime, I moved out of Martha's guest room and into a small apartment above Tina's pottery studio. The space was modest but filled with light, with large windows overlooking the town square and built-in shelves that soon displayed my growing collection of ceramic pieces. It felt like the perfect transitional home, close to my work, independent, but not isolated, mine in a way no space had ever truly been before. Winter settled over Oak Ridge, transforming the landscape with snow and ice. The community center bustled with increased activity as people sought indoor pursuits during the cold months. My pottery classes with Sophie and Lucas continued weekly, now supplemented by occasional visits from Tyler and Amy, who had expressed interest in learning after seeing their cousins' creations. The Winter Arts Festival jury accepted 2 of my pieces for exhibition: the abstract sculpture that had captured my anger during those early days of awakening, and a new work I had created specifically for the event, a female figure emerging from a cocoon-like structure, face lifted toward an unseen light. I titled it simply, Becoming. On the opening night of the festival, the community center's gallery was transformed with twinkling lights, elegant refreshments, and the excited buzz of artists and patrons. My pieces were displayed in a well-lit corner, alongside works from other local creators ranging from seasoned professionals to talented amateurs. Tina, as one of the featured artists, had a larger display nearby showcasing her more technically advanced ceramics. I stood nervously near my work, dressed in an outfit Martha and I had carefully selected for the occasion, a deep burgundy wrap dress paired with boots that were both stylish and comfortable, a far cry from the conservative attire that had been my uniform during my married life. My hair, which I had let grow out slightly, was styled in soft waves around my face, and I wore a simple silver pendant Tina had given me as a housewarming gift. "Mrs. Harrington?" A woman in her 30s approached, notebook in hand. "I'm Allison Reeves from the Oak Ridge Gazette. I'd love to ask you a few questions about your work if you have a moment." "Of course," I agreed, still unused to being approached as an artist rather than simply Richard's wife. "And please, call me Beth." "Beth, then," she smiled. "Your piece, Becoming, has generated quite a bit of buzz tonight. Can you tell me about the inspiration behind it?" I gazed at my creation, the female figure I had shaped with such care, each line and curve imbued with meaning. "It represents transformation," I explained, "the messy, difficult, beautiful process of emerging from one state of being into another, of discovering who you truly are beneath the layers of expectation and habit." "And is that something you've experienced personally?" she asked, her pen poised above her notebook. "Yes," I answered simply. "At 67, I'm becoming who I was always meant to be." She nodded, jotting down my words. "I understand this is a relatively new artistic pursuit for you. What prompted you to begin working with clay?" The question gave me pause. So many possible answers tumbled through my mind: my heart diagnosis, Richard's betrayals, Martha's support, Tina's encouragement. But the truest answer was both simpler and more complex. I needed to create something that was solely mine, I said finally. Something that couldn't be taken from me or diminished. Clay offered that opportunity to transform something raw and shapeless into something intentional and meaningful. Allison seemed pleased with this response, noting it carefully before moving on to more technical questions about my process and future artistic plans. As we spoke, I noticed movement. Near the gallery entrance, Richard standing stiffly in a charcoal suit, scanning the room with evident discomfort. Our eyes met across the crowded space, and after a moment's hesitation, he made his way toward me. "Mr. Harrington." Allison brightened with the instinct of a journalist sensing a story. "Are you here to support your wife's artistic debut?" Richard, I cleared his throat awkwardly. Yes, I suppose I am." I thanked Allison for the interview and promised to speak with her again later. When she moved away, Richard and I regarded each other with the cautious assessment of former intimates now operating on unfamiliar terrain. "Your lawyer sent over the revised settlement terms," he said finally, his voice formal. "They seem reasonable. I've instructed my team to proceed." "Thank you," I replied, equally businesslike. "That will simplify things." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Richard glanced at my sculpture, his expression unreadable. "This is what you've been doing all these months? Making art?" Among other things, rediscovering myself, building a new life. He shook his head slightly, as if still unable to comprehend the transformation I had undergone. Eleanor declined my proposal, he said abruptly. She's moved back to Boston. I'm sorry, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Not because I wished for Richard's happiness with Eleanor specifically, but because I no longer harbored the bitterness that had initially fueled my revelations at the anniversary dinner. Are you? He studied my face with genuine curiosity. I would have thought you'd be pleased. My happiness isn't dependent on your unhappiness, Richard. That's one of the most important things I've learned recently. He absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. I never meant to hurt you, Elizabeth. You just prioritized your own needs and desires, I finished for him, as you always have. The difference is, I'm finally prioritizing mine as well. Around us, the exhibition continued. People admiring artwork, engaging in conversations, enjoying the festive atmosphere. This public space, filled with creativity and community, felt worlds away from the private dining room at the lighthouse where we had last confronted each other. We were different people here, not husband and wife locked in familiar patterns, but two individuals finding their way through the aftermath of a shared history. Your work is quite good, Richard said after another silence, gesturing toward my sculpture with a hint of reluctant admiration. You clearly have a talent for this. The compliment, awkward but seemingly sincere, caught me off guard. Thank you, I said simply. I never knew you wanted to be an artist, he added, a note of accusation creeping into his voice. Neither did I replied honestly. But then, I never gave myself permission to find out. Richard nodded slowly, as if finally beginning to understand something fundamental about our marriage and its dissolution. Well, he said, straightening his tie in that familiar nervous gesture. I should let you get back to your fans. I smiled at the slight discomfort in his voice. Goodbye, Richard. As he walked away, I felt no regret, no lingering attachment, just a peaceful certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. The past 45 years had shaped me, but they didn't define me. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility, mine to craft as deliberately as the clay beneath my hands. Tina appeared at my side, beaming with pride. Your pieces are getting a lot of attention. The director of the North Shore Gallery was just asking about you. I laughed, still unused to being the focus of such interest. One step at a time. I'm still learning. Aren't we all? She replied wisely. That's the beauty of it. There's always more to discover, more to become. More to become. The phrase echoed in my mind, perfectly capturing the journey I had begun that October day, when I first realized my invisibility in my own home. From the doctor's ignored report to this moment of public recognition, I had been in a constant state of becoming, shedding old limitations, embracing new possibilities, shaping my life with the same intentional care I now brought to my art. As I looked around the gallery at the community that had helped facilitate my transformation, Martha, with her unflinching support, Tina with her artistic guidance, my grandchildren with their uninhibited creativity, I felt a profound gratitude. The path forward wouldn't always be smooth, but it would be authentically mine. And that, I realized as I turned back to greet another person interested in my work, was the greatest truth of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.